throwing, intimidating, but making sure his kids graduate wins. You know, Mike Krzyzewski, his protege, might break Bob Knight's career wins record, but won't ever be another general. I mean, yeah, come on, you've seen and heard the video clips, but to understand Robert Montgomery Knight, you got to go back to Orville, Ohio, a championship at Ohio State, to West Point, and you got to step back into Hoosier land where Knight won 3 titles. It is a journey Jeremy Schaap took for reasons both professional and personal.
We have given Indiana University basketball coach Bob Knight one last chance, and he's failed to take full advantage of that opportunity. Coach Knight has behaved and acted in a way that is both defiant and hostile.
When the end finally came in September of the year 2000, it wasn't because of a chair or a choke. Instead, it was the elbow of Indiana student Ken Harvey, which Bob Knight grabbed after Harvey said to him, "Hey Knight, what's up?"
I would have to be an absolute moron with the things that have been laid down on me to grab a kid in public and curse at a kid in public, and that is absolutely, totally untrue.
But that explanation didn't satisfy Indiana President Miles Brand.
I gave him the option of resigning as head basketball coach. He declined, and I notified him that he was being removed as basketball coach, effective immediately.
Just 3 days later, Knight said goodbye to Indiana.
Wish myself and my family the very best, as I wish you the very best.
The competition to secure the first interview with Knight was intense. He chose ESPN and me, mostly because he'd had a long-standing friendship with my father, Dick Schaap. I'd known Knight since I was a teenager. Now I was sitting down with him for a live 30-minute interview. For Knight, it was a chance to show millions of people that he wasn't what Miles Brand had called him, defiant and hostile. But Knight became agitated during a commercial break.
You interrupt too much. No, I'm serious. I don't like that. You know, if I'm going to be here and I've got points to make, I'm going to make those points. I'm going to be back. Don't worry about that.
We've only got a minute.
But don't interrupt me again.
Following the break, the interview continued.
But again, before you interrupted me, and you have a real faculty for doing that.
Thank you.
No, I don't think it's anything to really be too proud of myself. I think when I talked about Pat...
Bob, you came here to do an interview. I'm asking you questions.
When I talked... Well, then let me finish the answer. Is that okay, Jeremy?
Ahead.
Is that fair enough?
Please, go right ahead.
Have I interrupted your questions yet?
Yes.
No, I haven't. You've interrupted my answers with your questions, and then I've tried to get back. So let me finish this. You got a long way to go to be as good as your dad. You better keep that in mind.
Just wait a second. 5 minutes later, the interview was over.
Bob, thank you very much.
You got a lot to learn, Jeremy. A lot to learn.
For the better part of 30 minutes, Knight and I had discussed the circumstances of his dismissal. But of all the things he said, it was his personal attack on me that made the most immediate impact. Suddenly, I was part of the story, as my father acknowledged a few days later.
Bob Knight has been my friend for years, but now he owes my son an apology. He made it personal. I wonder how Bob would have reacted if someone had taken a shot like that at one of his sons.
Perhaps no sports figure of the last 40 years has been more frequently analyzed and dissected, debated and discussed than Bob Knight. Still, Knight is in many ways a mystery. Like so many who've observed him, I've long wanted to know what made him the man he became. For answers, I sought out people who knew him well long before his arrival at Indiana.
We fished, we hunted. There was inevitably something to do, just to be off and having a good time.
Norman Douglas and Bob Knight were best friends growing up 60 years ago in tiny Orrville, Ohio. When Knight was in Little League, Douglas was his teammate. He remembers Knight's father as a powerful influence.
His dad was just a really straight shooter. He was just absolutely a person that told the truth, period.
Amateur psychologists have been analyzing Bob Knight for a long time. If there is something that you could find that kind of defines him, what might that be?
His parents, primarily friends and town, all have this sense of right and wrong. And I really believe that's the essence of the man.
From Orrville, Knight went to Ohio State on a basketball scholarship. His teammates included future Hall of Famers Jerry Lucas and John Havlicek. Havlicek says that at times Knight, who as a coach would insist that his players attend class, wasn't a disciplined student himself.
I remember there was a period of time, I don't know how many straight days it was, that he didn't go to class. And when he showed up, the professor said, "Oh, it's nice to see that you're still alive or you're still with us."
We'll worry about what's past when we get these 4 over with, I think.
On the other hand, Knight wholly dedicated himself to Fred Taylor's Buckeyes. Ohio State won the NCAA title in 1960 and reached the national championship game the following 2 years. But Knight was always the odd man out. He desperately wanted to start, but Taylor never elevated him from the bench.
How do you think he eventually came to grips with what his role was going to be?
I don't know if he ever came to grips with it, because I always think in his own mind he probably should have played more, and maybe he's right in a lot of respects.
Like Havlicek and Lucas, Mel Knowles started for the Buckeyes and would go on to play in the NBA.
What impact do you think not getting the playing time at Ohio State that he wanted had on the rest of Bob Knight's life?
I think it has a great deal to do with why he's so successful. I think you can't help but come out of that with a recognition that once you get in a position of some control over your own destiny, you're going to exercise that control. And I think that's what Bobby does.
As his closest friends were moving on to the NBA, Knight moved to Northern Ohio, not far from Orrville, to coach the Cuyahoga Falls High School junior varsity in 1962.
Where would Bobby Knight stand?
Right there.
Right over there?
Yeah, I just had some fun showing you where he was.
Gary Eber's the only man to play for Knight at 2 different schools. In college at Army, but before that on the JV team at Cuyahoga Falls.
To help me learn how to catch, he would stand about here, and then he would
just
fire.
Just
and
whip
it's kind
it
of
at
like the
you.
old game of fireball, but there was no dodging. You had to catch it. And
Eber says Knight was no gentler when he was teaching history. Like many of the teachers of the day, Knight, Eber says, wasn't above resorting to corporal punishment.
You didn't talk, and if you did, you knew what the consequences were. And certainly he packed a pretty good wallop, and I never got one from him. But there were those that did, and this was off the basketball court.
After a single season at the high school level, Knight went to West Point as an assistant coach. The head coach was Tates Locke, only 2 years Knight's senior.
We led the country in technicals when we were together there. Back then, that wasn't a statistic that people kept, but it would be today. And we were just off the wall, Jeremy.
In 1965, Knight succeeded Locke as head coach. Of all the dozens of young men who'd play for him in his 6 seasons there as head coach, none was closer to Knight than point guard Mike Krzyzewski.
I learned about passion. I learned about preparation. I learned X's and O's. I learned how to use the skills of each of the players and combine them to make a better whole.
When Krzyzewski was a senior, his father died suddenly from a brain hemorrhage. Knight flew to Chicago to be with Krzyzewski for the funeral.
He spent 3 days with my family, and showed care. And he told me, he says, you can stay here. Don't worry about coming back. I came back. We won the 2 games, not because of me, but we won the 2 games. We went to the NIT, made the Final Four, and he never wanted any recognition for that.
But Knight is also stubborn. Because of a dispute at the 1992 Final Four, he and Krzyzewski didn't speak for nearly a decade.
How did you guys find a way to heal the rift that was between you in the 90s?
Yeah, that was just a stupid thing, and we both know that. But as a result of all that, we are as close and love one another as much as we possibly can. I talk to him once or twice every week. I consider him one of my best friends, and as happens in sometimes relationships where people do love one another, there are problems.
In the end, Knight remains an inscrutable tangle of contradictions. A disciplinarian who frequently lacks self-discipline. He demands respect, but often withholds it. He's been smart and foolish, successful and self-destructive, a devoted friend, and his own worst enemy.
I believe most of the kids that left the programs that he's coached them are probably stronger, more capable, and ready for life. And would I have wanted my one son to be coached under that program? I wouldn't have done it. I wouldn't have sent my kid there to go under those steps and procedures.
Those who know Knight best suggest that his combativeness, so much of what defines him, stems from his inability to see shades of gray. In Bob Knight's world, there is black and there is white.
People talk about a temper, and I call that a highly developed sense of right and wrong.
I think he felt so right about his overall approach to the game that there wasn't any room for someone to have an opinion totally different.
That's who Bob Knight is. He knows what he thinks is right, and he will do that. A lot of ordinary people that allow somebody else to define what's right and wrong for them. He doesn't, and I admire that.
Bob Knight did not respond to our request for an interview for this story. Monday night, Knight's alma mater, Ohio State, jumping in its first NCAA championship game since 1962, which was their 3rd straight title game. A team that had a young but still intense Robert Montgomery Knight coming off the bench. One of the best days of the year to be a sports fan. A whole lot to see on Monday, while the Gators-Buckeye battle for the national title is loaded with flavor.